and they don't see things with the same eyes that somebody from somewhere else might. So hopefully, maybe you'll see something new. I would imagine that a lot of you probably know more about this than I do. You know what? I was asked to do this paper by Jennifer Thompson from the Historical Society, and I thought, boy, this is going to be really easy, because it's, it's just Bullhead Lodge and Lake McDonald. There can't be all that much to it. But the more I got into it, the more I found that there is a lot to it. There's a lot more that I need to learn too. And if there's those of you out there who know more than I do, I'd love to talk to you. What I have done with this is go through our collection of historic photos from the Russell Museum. And they're almost all, I'd say 99% from Russell's own collection of photographs. And then I went to Bullhead Lodge myself and took some photographs. So the color photographs are mine, and they're contemporary photographs taken in September, very contemporary. And the black and white photographs are all photographs that are from Russell's collections himself. So, and what I'd kind of like for you to do is to imagine. Historians are good at imagining things, So let's take a historical trip backwards and put yourself about 1910. And what I would like for you to do is think about spending a weekend with Charlie and Nancy Russell at Bullhead Lodge on Lake McDonald. And I will be reading a lot of quotes and citations that I have gotten from various places that are real live experiences of people who actually lived with the Russells or visited the Russells on Lake McDonald. So, let's get things going here. Yeah, snow. Yeah. Snowstorm. Well, this is, excuse me, this is Lake McDonald now. When I was up in September, Charlie Russell really loved Glacier Park and spent a lot of his time there from nearly the turn of the century till the end of his life in 1926. Charlie Russell, this is a quote that was taken from the Great Falls Tribune in 1937. Charlie Russell was the most loved man that the state of Montana has ever produced, a man that was almost as much a part of Glacier National Park as the rugged snow-capped mountains themselves. It's a letter written by Charlie Russell in 1914. I spend my summers at Lake McDonald on the west side of the main range where I have a cabin. It is about as wild a place as you can find these days, and that is what I like. Another letter in 1915. If it's laying down you need, Lake McDonald is the best bed ground in the world, and my lodge is open and the pipe lit for you and yours. You know that lake country sings the cradle song to all who lay in her lap. And the invitation to you to go along with Charlie. I have a camp in Glacier Park where the pipe is lit and the robes spread for you anytime you come. The cabin was located near the shore of Lake McDonald, just over Gunsight Pass, in the shadow of the lofty peaks of Garden Wall, Jackson, and Brown. Charlie thought of the mountains as great living things and once stated in simple, expressive language, I think the mountains are just asleep. To get to Lake McDonald, you would have to take the Great Northern Railway, probably from Great Falls to Belton, which is now West Glacier. And from Belton, you would take a farm wagon, or a stage as they called it, to Apgar. And from Apgar, which probably only had one or two cabins there at the time, you would have to take a boat across the beach, across the lake to the beach at the foot of Bullhead Lodge. When you arrived on, excuse me, my voice gets stuck in the morning. When you would arrive at Bullhead Lodge by boat, you would have seen a white buffalo skull made of planks that would mark the boat landing. It's the only thing you could see. You can't see the cabin from the lake itself. You would go up the hill, steep hill to where the cabin was lit with a big railroad lantern, and see the log cabin with cedar shakes. And there's springs of ice water all around the cabin. It was usually very overgrown if you were going there in the spring from the winter growth. And one of the first things that the Russells would do when they got there is start cleaning out all the undergrowth. This is the front of the original cabin, and the logs are the steps and the porch that go up to the front of the cabin. And you can see on this, the steps going up that would have greeted you, there's 2 gnomes standing up there on the top of those posts. I hope you can see them. This is a stereo slide, so just pick 1/2 of it and you'll see, otherwise you see 4 gnomes. But there's actually 2 and 1/2, you know, so that's what you should be looking at. So you would be walking up the steps after you walked up up from the beach, and Linderman's daughter says this: "I remember most of the spell as delightful wood gnomes cast over the approach to their cabin, and the delight Mr. Russell expressed over the golden network formed by sunlight playing on the waters of Lake McDonald." The little people, or gnomes, were placed on the upright post of the main porch, an Indian and a gnome, always one Indian and one gnome, pieced together out of roots, odd-shaped twigs and branches, hair of green moss. The Indian's hair was of black moss, which the trade rats would steal all the time. They didn't like the green moss, but they did like the black moss. And Charlie would collect these materials on his walks through the woods and make these as guards to the steps on his cabin. And I want you to notice the shields on these. The shield on this one, and then the shield on this one. And so he actually used them in his pictures. This is an illustrated letter that was written in 1908 that talks about the cabin and some of the animals and some of the critters and some of the activities that take place there in the night. 1 or 2 skunks have taken up quarters under the house and seem to like the place. Also, a number of mountain rats have moved in, and by the noise they make, I've a hunch my night watchers are sleeping on guard. As soon as dark comes, the newcomers goes to work, all hands. The skunks practice 2 steps and barn dances on the porch or in the kitchen. The rats don't seem to like our roof. All night long, they're busy making it over, occasionally stopping to gather up toothbrushes, leaving rocks, sticks, or old bones in exchange. They are traders who believe a fair exchange is no robbery. The great horned owl in the cedars at intervals asks who. No one knows, so receiving no answer, he keeps it up all night, and at daybreak flies away in disgust, but returns the next night with the same question. It's too bad someone can't tell him. Then he would be greeted by Nancy and Charlie on the steps of the Bullhead Lodge, named so for the buffalo bison skull that's up there on the porch. As you had come across the lake, Austin Russell states as he was coming for his first visit to Bullhead Lodge, "Welcome to Bullhead Lodge," said Aunt Nancy as we steered into a log float. The white thing was a buffalo skull cut out of planks and set up on a pole to mark the landing. Behind it, a steep 100 yards up the hill, was the cabin, and Nancy lit a big railroad lantern and we went up. As soon as we stepped off the tinkling pebbles of the beach, the ground was covered inches deep with a brown and springy floor of pine needles as slick as glass and shining like bronze in the lantern light. You would then begin to look around the cabin. And this is an overview of all of the cabins: the main cabin, a little gazebo, and the studio cabin. This is what it would look like when you got there first, and then, as I said, slowly started cleaning out until it looked like it had almost been swept. You can see in this picture Charlie Russell sitting on the steps in an easel on the porch. This is another stereo view, so you've got to use one eye. And here's the group standing on the porch again. The gazebo's covered now with a canvas. The cabin was primitive in the extreme, which suited Charlie perfectly. Clustered cabins of Bullhead Lodge stand high above a cool mountain lake surrounded by glaciers and mountain peaks. The large living cabin, which also serves as a sleeping cabin, is furnished with numerous cots and disappearing beds. These are secluded at night by 2 fold screens of white muslin, each panel decorated by some artist who has spent a summer at the lodge. All the cabins are lighted with skylights as well as windows, because it was found that the studio, where the highlight was a working necessity, was the brightest and best, catching the light above the forest even on the gray days. That came rarely in the Rockies. He rises early while the lake in front of the cabin is still gray and silver, and the rose and gold of the morning is yet high on the mountain tops. Mixing up pancakes with the skill of his cowboy days, he breakfasts and goes to work. Many guests are called to Bullhead Lodge, but they are not invited for hunting or fishing or any strenuous outdoor sports. Charlie Russell fishes but little, and only once did he try to hunt for pleasure. This must be one of those gray days, is what I thought. And the porch is where a lot of activity happened at Bullhead Lodge. This is what it looks like now. The porch is being restored, but the cabins themselves look very much as they did when Russell was there. The land was bought from Simon Apgar in 1906, who had patented it in 1895 as a homestead. Russell had visited Glacier for many, many years previous to that and was a friend of Apgar's and had bought this from Apgar. In 1910, Glacier was established as a national park, so Russell had been there and had this home site for 4 years before Glacier was made a park. The main building, this building right here, was started in 1906. And the east portion of this, which you can't see, and we're looking at the western side of this, I guess, is a large fireplace that was built by Simon Apgar also. The whole building was built by local craftsmen, E.J. Kruger and Martin Sibley. And you see, it was made of dark red cedar. You can see that the windows are lined with cedar, which was added later. This main cabin had a dog run behind it and was attached to a kitchen behind that, and then later that was closed in, and I will show you some pictures of that. This is the front door of the cabin where you would go into the main room, which was what, like I said, the original cabin or studio, as it was called at one point. This is around the side of it, and you can see where the dog run connects the two buildings. The building that, not the one on the far, that left, but kind of middle left, is the kitchen and dining room area. And then that would have been the dog run in between. It is filled in now, and they're sleeping rooms now. And then the main studio or the main living area on the other end. And this is it now, and I want you to notice the outdoor oven, the stone oven. It's kind of in a shadow here. I'll have some photographs of it later on, but just a location of that. And there's another guard up on the railings there. You notice the railings also. Charlie liked natural curves of wood and very primitive kinds of furniture and primitive decorations, and so you'll notice that those rails are just made out of the natural forms of the wood. And there's a fish pond here. You can just see the concrete base of it up in the trees, just a little bit to the left as you're going up this pathway. Now, if you had later on come to visit Charlie, you could go in by the road, and this is the road going into Glacier there near West Glacier or Belton. And this is what you would have seen if you came in by car, and this is the roof of the two buildings, the studio cabin with a log. You can see that it has a log. It's a concrete fireplace that is lined outside with logs, and then the main H-shaped building over here, which is the main residence. And you can see the skylights in them. Notice the skylights that were put in all of the rooms there. And this is what it looks like today, very much the same. The skylights have been covered up. When I was up there, I talked to the owner's son, and he said that one winter there was so much snow there that a bear was up on the roof, and they were afraid it was going to fall through the skylights, so they decided to board the skylights up. And that's Charlie and Nancy sitting on the steps. You can see those nice curved railings there. And the lake is in the back. And a group shot. Charlie, when I was asking people about this initially, they said, well, yeah, you don't hear much about Bullhead Lodge because it was a retreat. Well, I hardly think so, because, I mean, retreats mean you go somewhere to be in solitude and quiet, and there were always people at Bullhead Lodge. Always people. There's the same steps on those great curved railings. And this is the main part of the cabin again, with the big fireplace, interior of the fireplace. And then down the base here, the concrete base down here, Charlie and Philip Goodwin scratched some little drawings in there, and there are initials in there of people who helped build it and little prints and so on and so forth. And here's the fireplace. This is, or the cook stove. This is what they cooked on, and then would retire inside. So if you were there visiting, looking around the place, you would have your meals cooked here on the fireplace. And that's the ice house and the spring house in the back, the little small building there. There were a lot of springs on this property, and they put pipes down into the spring, and so they had water that came out into the little spring house in the back. And that's the studio cabin on the right here, which was built later apparently, and it's just one very large room with a big fireplace in it. I think that there may be a couple of small sleeping rooms in the back. I wasn't able to get into the buildings. They were locked up when I was there, so I have not been inside other than just peeping through the windows. So, but a lot of visitors would stay at this cabin. Then you would be invited inside after you looked around the buildings and saw what Charlie and Nancy had done. And again, you can notice the cedar window frames. And this is the inside of the main cabin. Simon Apgar built the fireplace here, and Philip Goodwin and Charlie Russell scratched drawings into the concrete when it was still damp. When then they tried at one point they had put up wood frames to build the fireplace, wood supports to pour the concrete and form the fireplace, wooden forms. And they decided that all they needed to do was burn them out. So they built fire in the fireplace and almost set the forest on fire. You know, there were flames coming out of the top of the chimney, and everybody ran out of the house, and the house was full of smoke, you know, and they were running in and throwing water on it, and I think it was quite a disaster. It did survive. This is it today. Nancy and Charlie shared a lot of their summers with family, with friends, with artists from across the country. Charlie would get up in the mornings, about 6 o'clock in the morning, and walk through the woods, and that's where he got his peace and quiet, you know, the only time he really had to himself. There were a lot of visitors from New York, publishers, a lot of local friends from Great Falls, and they all congregated here in the main cabin. This is Harry Stanford. You can see a bit of the scratchings and some of the sculptures or models of Russell's up on the fireplace on the mantle. These are the screens. The artists and friends and visitors and family and everybody else would sign the screens. They were originally used to separate sleeping areas in this cabin because when this was the only cabin, because it's just one large room. And they were put up every year from 1907 on, I believe. And people would draw, as you can see, draw and sign their names on them. And Philip Goodwin, who was one of the visitors that came quite often and helped he did the big moose on the fireplace there and quite a few of the other things, said that it was the treat of a lifetime to spend a vacation in Charlie's company at Lake McDonald. And he was there in 1906, 1907, 1909, and 1910. And Bill Krieghoff was there, was another well-known artist, and Joe Shirley spent a lot of time at Lake McDonald and their families. This is a better picture of the fireplace. You can see, you know, the screens, the drawings. Please note the boat up there, and right underneath the boat, and to the right just a little bit is what they call a shelf fungus. It's a mushroom that grew in the forest there. That has a real creamy white side that you can draw on or paint on, and Charlie would collect those and etch, you know, pictures of deer and so on in them. And that one does have a picture of a deer on it, but I don't think you can see it in the slide very well. And these are some of the etchings that are in the fireplace, and the moose above the fireplace that has Philip Goodwin's signature in it. this is where they would come in and have their dinner after they had cooked it outside. There's a Prairie Father, is that one of Charlie's sculptures, which is on the table. That table is still there. And the bedrooms, where the visitors would go to spend the night. You can see the walls again lined with cedar bark. Must have smelled awfully good in there. And then the next morning you would go probably out on the porch and just talk and have your coffee, your burned coffee that Charlie would have made, and get ready for a day of fun and relaxation in Charlie's company. A quote from a 1917 article in Recreation magazine: "Few men get so much fun out of life as he does, but after all, it is his work that gives Russell the most enjoyment. May he continue for many years to ride his peck bronco, spin a rope, build full-rigged toy ships, whittle little men out of knots, pinch little bears out of a lump of modeling wax, wear his sash and his high-heeled boots, avoid a derby hat and bib overalls, keep out of boats, and especially canoes, spin yarns, get Mrs. Russell to write his letters, and otherwise conserve his wonderful youth." Charlie was an early riser who burned his own bacon, which meant made his own breakfast, which was usually sourdough pancakes, ham, and eggs. He took his morning walks along the lake or through the woods, and also used the mornings to work on his paintings or drawings from the sketches he had made in the woods, and often on the porch of the cabin that is nearest the lake, which is this one, and spent the evenings with his guests around the large fireplace inside. You know, I have painted myself, and it makes me incredibly nervous to have people like this watching me paint, but apparently Charlie really liked it, you know, and it did not bother him, and he could paint with tons of people around and really enjoyed it. This is looking down from the porch onto the lake, and this is from the same spot today. Like I said, the porch is being replaced, so you don't get that same sense of it right now. Or you could go boating with Charlie, which you're probably taking your life in your hands if you were to do that. His nephew, Austin Russell, says, "Charlie was the world's worst oarsman. It was impossible to keep stroke with him. He rowed with a short, choppy jerk, and every few minutes he let his oars trail and turned around to see where he was going. He never learned, and you couldn't persuade him to try to set his course by some tree or other landmark astern. He had to keep turning around to look ahead." Charlie had both a canoe and a skiff, but he particularly did not like canoes. He often claimed to be water shy, and later stated that there was just too much water in the ocean for him to feel comfortable in it. When he was living in California, he hated to get in boats. But that's Charlie, second from the left, rowing there, but you can see he's going parallel with the shore, so he didn't want to get too far out in the middle of the lake. Or he would make boats. Frank Linderman says this: "Russell had no experience with watercraft, particularly sailboats, and yet at his cabin on Lake McDonald he made toy schooners and ships that were exquisitely modeled. When he sailed them on the lake, their rotors were so perfectly controlled by their sails that when set upon a course in a beam wind, they kept right to it. He followed his scudding vessels waiting along the lake shore like a small boy. Often, when called to supper, he had to resort to a skiff to recover them." It was Goodwin who taught Charlie to stretch a rubber band from the tiller to the mainsail so the ship would steer itself and come about in the wind. Charlie himself made 2 square-rigged models, shrouds and all, with a lookout at the masthead and a man at the wheel, but they were slower than Goodwin's yacht and did not come about as neatly, and often went to Davy Jones' locker. That was Austin Russell. Or you could go swimming, only if you had one of these kinds of bathing suits. A letter in 1908 from Russell: "We have just returned from a trip to the glacier and had good weather and a fine time. The weather since has been rainy and cold up to the last few days. It is now fine. Tell Miss Sunshine that the lake is still warm in spite of the cold weather," which I find very hard to believe. But that's Nancy Russell, second from the right, and Jack Russell, and they actually got in the water, and apparently they would bathe there. They didn't have a bathroom, you know, a tub or anything. Often brushed their teeth in the water in the lake and so on. But These I thought were just real gems. I got these in 2 days ago. I never saw Charlie Russell in a bathing suit. And I wasn't sure that Charlie Russell ever got in the water, but there he is. And he looks like he's very tentative about it, holding on to the little pier there, you know, not wanting to get too far away. That's Austin Russell with him there, his nephew. But here he's all wet, so I mean, he does get into the water. Or you could just go to the gazebo and chat. This is Jody Young, and you can see the gnomes there again. In the little coves and nooks of the stream near his Lake McDonald cabin, Charlie arranged little groups of miniature figures of Indians with tiny bows and arrows, horses and teepees, and grotesque little men of the mountains with beards of moss, in clay or carved out of wood. Often in the summer, we drove to the Russell cabin on Lake McDonald, where fascinating elves created by him from the cedar bark around the cabin eyed us from porch railings and steps. He also placed them in various places around the cabins, usually on the ground, carved canes for use on the trails, collected and painted on a particular type of fungus. He also made figures out of clay. In the Hopi country, the Indian women showed him how they modeled and baked their pottery. Finding suitable clay at Lake McDonald, he modeled Indians, buffalo, horses, and elk, and baked his creations Hopi fashion as though all of his life he had worked at pottery making. And I like the one that looks like he's drumming on the toadstool. And here he and Jody Young was deaf, are talking sign language to the gnomes and the little people. And I think that Charlie thought that these little guys came to life in the middle of the night and went about their own festivities. Or you could dress up in Charlie's collection of Indian costumes. I mean, Charlie loved to masquerade. He had a very important collection of Indian costumes and paraphernalia that was given to him primarily. This is Austin Russell's sister, his niece, Russell's niece, Isabel. And he liked very much to have his pictures taken, and sometimes even used his own picture dressed up as an Indian in some of his paintings. Or you could just go hiking. This is Philip Goodwin. He wrote in a letter to friend Phil in 1920, "You better load your war bag and drift to Belton. My shack will be open for you. Lake McDonald is not what it used to be, but there are still some wild spots near. The deer are quite tame, and we see them often. If you come, we'll take another tumpline trip." And that's old day backpacking. Or you could go at the end of your backpacking trip on a picnic. I don't know who this person is. If anybody out there does, I'd love to know. He looks awfully familiar to me, but I just am not sure. And this is Russell with a picture with a gun, although at this point in his life, Russell didn't hunt. So I said, you could go hiking through the woods with Russell, but not hunting. Linderman, I have this quote from Linderman, "No other man alive knew the anatomy of our native animals as he did, and yet during all the years we had hunted together, he never once failed to sketch the bodies, heads, legs, eyes, and ears of deer, elk, bear, mountain sheep, or goats as soon as the animals were dead. None was ever old to him. Each seemed to offer something new for his pencil. Inordinately fond of their meat as he was, I never knew him to kill a deer, elk, or any other animal." Charlie was 46 in 1910. This is Austin Russell. He began life as a professional hunter. He had now stopped killing. Though he still went hunting with Frank Linderman and Bill Krieghoff and other people, he did not carry a gun. He had reached the point where he didn't like to kill, for the same reason he had stopped fishing. Fishermen laughed at this, citing the well-known fact that the fish is cold-blooded and has no nerves and can't feel pain. "Sure," said Charlie, "that's why you jump 6 feet out of the water when he gets the barb in his eye. And the live bait minnow wiggling on the hook wiggles because it tickles him. And the caught fish, slowly drowning with a rope through his gill, really enjoys it." So Russell really did not participate much. He wandered through the woods looking for animals, looking for scenes to draw. And these are deer right at his beach at Lake McDonald. Let's go back to that one. There were always a lot of animals around the lodge. We spent 2 months at the lake and had a pretty good time. The deer are getting very tame since shooting is barred. Several times they came right in front of the cabin. I put salt in the trail and they came quite often to lick. I will merely mention, this is Austin Russell again, I will merely mention the trade rats who played up on the roof every night and stole our toothbrushes and left pine cones and strips of bark in exchange. And the chipmunks down near the water, and the pine squirrels who scolded at us on the trails, and the porcupine who hid under the boat, and Charlie got some of his quills by flicking him with a gunny sack. We also saw a skunk, very neat and clean looking and very leisurely and sure of himself. We gave him the trail. And we saw several bunches of deer and a weasel, long and slim and as quick as a flash, who darted out from under a log, and a mother shrew no bigger than your thumb and her microscopic babies. Of course, there were moose back in the beaver meadows and bear and timber wolves and mountain lions, but we never saw them. In 1910, there were big forest fires around Lake McDonald. And they threatened the area there, and not necessarily Russell's cabin because it was on the other side of the lake. But Austin says that there were several forest fires threatening land and animals around Lake McDonald while Russell was there. The fires created an eerie red sun, falling soot, with layers of soot on the lake and dense gray clouds. Fires broke over the hill across the lake, and everyone went down to the lake to watch its progress. It even looks here like somebody's fishing.
Ambiguous enough to include an iconoclast. Our third presentation is by Chris Erickson. Chris grew up in Missoula, graduated from Hellgate High School, as she says, without distinction. This, it seems to me, makes her a prime candidate for Montana history. She took a BA in zoology from University of Montana in 1988, and then decided that she liked books better than laboratories, and began the master's history program at the University of Montana in the fall of '88. She's promised her parents faithfully that she will be done this March, if she can finish the thesis. The topic of her thesis is the Klan in Butte, and this is part of it.
Probably have to adjust this a little higher. Okay, can everybody hear me? All right. And the title of my paper is The Boys in Butte, or The Ku Klux Klan Confronts the Catholics, 1923 to 1929. Early one morning in September 1923, Mrs. Carrie Bennett arose from her chair to answer a knock at her door. A small boy greeted her with a note that curtly stated, "Give this boy $150 or you will be killed this morning. Signed, KKK." Well, the frightened woman counted out $150 from her savings and gave it to him. Later that day, Probation Officer O'Connor and Deputy Sheriff Duggan traced the missing money to a motorcycle dealership. The officers arrested two boys, 12 and 13 years old, but not before the boys had enjoyed a brief ride in their new purchase. Both boys pleaded guilty. The money was returned to a relieved Mrs. Bennett. Now, a scapegoat for mischievous pranks was not the image the Ku Klux Klan of Butte envisioned when Imperial Headquarters granted their official charter on December 26, 1923. Undoubtedly, the 30 members of the new Continental Klan hoped to garnish a bit more respect, or at least toleration, from the citizens of Butte. They received neither. Surrounded by a well established and large immigrant and Catholic community, the bastion of white supremacy and anti-Catholicism found little room in which to maneuver. Typical clannish displays, such as burning crosses and conducting parades, were risky. Chasing bootleggers out of town was out of the question. Instead, Klansmen in Butte turned to the safety of their clavern to participate in elaborate rituals and to meet with fellow compatriots. Twice a month, between 20 and 25 white, native-born Protestant men would leave their titles of sales clerk and machinist behind them, don white hoods and robes, and enter the mysterious and secret world of the invisible empire. Here, according to imperial wizard William Joseph Simmons, only real men of kindred purpose, actuated by unselfish motives, dedicated to a manly mission and pledged to a noble ideal, could walk. Now, with the faithful practice of clannishness, Simmons assured Klansmen that they could lift themselves above the noxious atmosphere of selfish, sordid gain and place themselves on the lofty heights where the genial breezes of reciprocal fraternal fellowship forever wafts their inestimable blessings, and the sun of divine approbation is always bright. Now, though it is unlikely the Klansmen in Butte thought of their order in these flowery terms, the elaborate rituals and the necessary emphasis on fraternal fellowship characterized the secret order's stay in Butte. Following secret fraternal traditions, the Klan's sacred book, the Koran, outlined in excruciating detail opening, closing, and naturalization ceremonies. All rituals contain some reference to common fraternal symbols, the American flag, the U.S. Constitution, and of course the Bible. A giant cross, usually rigged with light bulbs for indoor use, would tower over the altar. After one of the terrors, or officers, lit the cross, which symbolized the dedication of Klansmen to their principles, members would settle down to the evening's business. Topics of the evening varied. The exalted Cyclops, or president, recited pertinent documents from imperial headquarters in Atlanta and official circulars from Louis Terwilliger, the Grand Dragon of Montana, who operated out of Livingston. Now, most of these circulars urged members to work harder to increase membership numbers in order to expand the Klan's influence in politics. Undoubtedly, the imperial palace also considered the extra revenue that the initiation fees and taxes would generate. In addition, imperial headquarters often devised special programs for an evening's discussion in hopes of retaining interest, such as the educational program for 1924. Terwilliger reminded the exalted Cyclops to make sure that only the most capable Klansmen would deliver the lectures on the Klan as a civic asset and Christ, the Klansman's criterion of character. Now, often Klansmen would enjoy a rousing speech by Terwilliger, a frequent visitor, or by other visitors over a variety of vital subjects such as proper Klansmanship, the superiority of the Nordic race, or the threat of Catholicism. After the lecture, the Klansmen would gravely discuss the evils existing in the community and at times would lace their conversation with racist jokes. A Klansmen's opinions about other people, including themselves, crept into their fraternal songs, right? Singing inspiring tunes such as, I won't sing. Our country stands for freedom. Our flag proclaims it too. No red shall wave over our fair land without the white and blue. We've got the kikes and Catholics a-shaking in their shoes, And it's nothing but the Ku Klux Klan that gives them all the blues. Now, active participation in the Klan's program also contributed to a Klansman's sense of self-importance. Right? Klansmen could serve the organization by sitting in on one of the many secret committees. Political committees investigated candidates running for office. They dug up information on the candidate's religion, his wife's religion, his stance on prohibition, and his fraternal affiliations. Investigatory committees spied on moonshine operations, reported their findings on public schools, and examined backgrounds of potential members to ascertain their worthiness. Sick committees checked on ailing brothers, bought them boxes of cigars, and gave their wives bunches of flowers. Often Klansmen would propose resolutions or amendments to the Klan's constitution and submit their ideas to Terwilliger for approval. Now, participation in rituals and lectures and committees contributed to a spirit of fellowship and camaraderie. Now, where else could fellow bigots and frustrated anti-Catholics get together and rally behind the banner of 100% Americanism? For the initiation price of $10, Klansmen could be part of the in-group, a citizen of the invisible empire, where all outsiders were aliens or enemies. The second imperial wizard, Hiram Wesley Evans, wrote a pamphlet, The Klan Answers, in which he stated, "Our country, the safety of our children, our Protestantism, the supremacy of our race are all threatened. The Klan, or as Evans put it, the army of Protestant Americanism, offered the only real source of protection. Protection against what? Well, according to the Klan, protection against the Catholics. The Catholics represented the most dangerous problem by threatening to overturn the American government and the educational system in the name of the Pope, according to the Klan." Well, Klansmen in Butte had plenty to discuss. Well, however, Klansmen confined their discussion to the monthly meetings. Secrecy was paramount. Under no condition were men allowed to share the Klan's intricities with aliens. Attempts at starting a conversation by whispering, "Ayak, are you a Klansman?" to the wrong person begged for trouble. Right? Klansmen across the state quickly grew aware of conditions in Butte and offered their deepest sympathies to the exalted Cyclops and the Kleegraps, or secretaries, who appreciated their gestures when, that is, they received their mail. Hiding the secret organization from the scrutiny of the mailmen in Butte proved less than successful. Even the Klan's public name, the Butte Men's Literary Club, right? Think those guys could read? And later, the Krishna Improvement Association did not fool the mailmen. Letters with torn envelopes would appear or would show up months late. Batches of pamphlets and membership cards failed to arrive. Frustrated, one Kleegrap ran for postmaster in Butte in 1924 to, as he put it, stop the mysterious straying of mail in the community. At times, the Kleegraps would assume different names to assure that their orders were delivered. Floyd Johnson told Terwilliger, not without a hint of pride, that he would use Knut Karl Knutson, a real, genuine Nordic name, get it, right? For his next order of robes. Later, another Kleegrap, Albert Jones, waited for the mailman every day to make sure that no one would see the mail and steal it. Trying to outfox the mailmen and other observers added that dash of excitement to an otherwise dismal existence. However, the Continental Klan was not without supporters. One 71-year-old woman, a former writer for the American Protective Association's local paper in Butte in the 1890s, frequently corresponded with Terwilliger and kept him posted on local conditions. Addressing her letters to the Brothers of America, Mrs. Cohen moaned and groaned about the overflow of Catholics in Butte and the Protestants who were going to sleep at the switch. Often, Mrs. Cohen would send Terwilliger gifts. One time, a miniature replica of a little red schoolhouse. Another time, a small statue of Al Smith in a coffin where he belongs, according to Terwilliger. Terwilliger assured Cohen that the Klan was present in Butte to give Protestants and real Americans a fair deal. He noted grimly, "We realize that Butte is the worst place in the state of Montana so far as alienism and Catholicism are concerned." The Continental Klan never realized the relative freedom of other clans across the state. They continued to look on with envy at the growth of Livingston, which was, as one enthusiastic member reported, a real 100% town. Even in Roundup, where there lived a considerable number of Catholics and immigrants, the local Klan was not as stifled as was the Klan in Butte. I think the strong contingency of Irish Catholics and other immigrants who characterized and controlled the city provided the main difference in Butte. Facing such clear opposition, Klansmen could not afford to recruit actively or to make public displays. The Ku Klux Klan depended on activism. No amount of fraternal masking could hide the militant nature of the secret order and the emphasis the imperial palace placed on political success and the installation of their peculiar standards of morality and racial superiority. Klansmen in Butte never implemented the core of the Klan's program. They could not, except within the safety of their cavern walls. Activism takes time and energy, and as it turned out, the Klansmen in Butte had neither. Almost 230 men joined the Klan in Butte during a 6-year existence, but usually only about 20 members would bother to attend the meetings, even during the busier days of the earlier 1920s. As the number of meetings declined due to falling attendance, so too did the number of interested members. When the Klan finally locked its doors after its last meeting in May 1929, not even half of the officers had attended. Clearly then, the fraternal aspects of the Klan in Butte failed to hold members' interest. Now, how long did members want to dig in their pockets to pay the eternal quarterly realm and imperial taxes and the local dues just to participate in unchanging ceremonies and to sit through meetings hearing the same jokes, and then finally to agree with each other that Butte was staunchly Catholic and would remain that way no matter what they did? Economic difficulties also played a role in declining membership. One distressed member wrote to Albert Jones in late 1927, stating, "Now, Mr. Jones, I do not want the boys to think I am trying to sidestep my duties or obligations, but I am not in a position to keep up my payments. I have had to drop all but my Masonic order, and I am not paid up with them. So if the boys will grant me a withdrawal card, I would certainly appreciate it. And when I feel able to go on, I will join again." He never got the chance. The last boys in Butte shelved their hoods and robes a year and a half later. The realm of Montana followed closely behind. Even Terwilliger's plea that the work of the Klan was high and holy work, a work in which angels and archangels might delight to engage, failed to convince Klansmen to reinstate. Instead, a blanket of apathy settled over Klansmen in Butte. When the last faithful few turned away from the invisible empire, perhaps they flipped through the pages of their songbook one more time, skipping past "The Klan is here to stay" to the more appropriate Kluxer blues.